panel. I'm your chair for this morning, Councillor Joe Hale. Would some of my colleagues, can we welcome Rhiannon Pearce from Public Health Wales and Joanna Markham from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, and we also have Amanda Carr here from SCVS. So can some of my colleagues, if you wouldn't mind going round and introducing yourselves? Thanks very much. In any order.
Well, I start. It's at the top of my screen anyway. I'm Councillor Linda James. I represent Penard Ward.
I'm Councillor Mike White. I represent the Landor Ward.
I'm Councillor Day Jenkins and I represent Gowerton Ward.
Good morning all. Mark Tribe representing Llangefell and Velindre, also a member of the Police and Crime Commissioner panel. Thank you.
I think on the last.
Yeah, Councillor Alan Jeffrey representing the Uplands Ward.
Thanks very much. I should have brought you in sooner because you're actually with me. So, but if we move on,
should I introduce myself for the benefit of
attendees? Thanks very much.
So I wanted to wait until members are gone. The members are the important ones. I'm merely their officer. I'm the Section 151 officer, Ben Smith, for the authority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. If we move on to the agenda, apologies for absence. We've got Peter Black and Francis O'Brien. Are there any others?
No other apologies.
You didn't introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Michelle Robertson. I'm the Scrutiny officer.
Thank you very much. Disclosure of any personal prejudicial interests? None. Prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips? No one's declared anything to me. The minutes of the last meeting, I wasn't in attendance, unfortunately. So if someone can put their hand up to agree the minutes if you were in attendance, thanks very much, Councillor White. Any public questions? We don't have any. And now if we move on to the main event of the day, well, it is here. The grant providers, and first up, I know that you've received some of our questions before the meeting, so I don't know if you want to just give either a preamble or if you just want to give us your understanding of how the system, I suppose, is equitable and how it fits in with the overarching funding scheme of your particular part of the service. So if we go to Rhiannon Pearce.
Hi, good morning, Bora Darrell. Thank you for the invite today. So I represent Public Health Wales on the National Exercise Referral Grant, which we deliver across Wales, so all 22 areas have coverage. So Swansea Council are one of our grant providers, and they employ members of staff with that grant to deliver exercise sessions across the Freedom Leisure sites across Swansea. So just a bit of background, if you're not aware, the scheme has been running since around 2005, whereby the Welsh Government undertook a randomised controlled trial on exercise referral schemes to look at the evidence. And therein then the national scheme was sort of born out of that. It's the only one in the UK. And the funding for each area was based on an application at that point in time. The scheme very much started as a sort of a prevention project. So if you were at risk of developing a condition, if you had sort of mild depression, blood pressure, weight, etc., then you were able to be referred by your GP or your physio into NERS. So in terms of equity, the scheme, the grant amounts are varied across Wales in terms of that sort of historical amount that was awarded back in 2005. And I guess, can I just clarify in the question, in terms of, are you looking at equity of the grant or equity of delivery?
It's around the delivery. Around
the delivery, okay. So in terms of how it works, it's not a self-referral. You need to be referred via a registered NHS healthcare professional. So I guess NERS will be privy to the same issues that other aspects of the NHS experiences at the moment, with ensuring that all parts of the population make full use of healthcare in their local area. And we know that there are some populations that are underserved by that. So we don't, as current, have any sort of ring-fenced projects looking at that. But certainly I know some of the areas where there are higher sort of populations, BME and minority ethnic communities, are looking at different ways to, once they're referred, to keep them on scheme. So there are women-only sessions. There are sessions whereby they'll open up community venues. They don't just rely on people coming into leisure centres, which can often, there'd be a lot of barriers.
Yeah, thanks very much. How would you say, how would you assess the scheme is value for money?
So we have a range of key performance indicators that all of the schemes have to report on across Wales. They range from number of referrals received, number invited to appointment, number attending first appointment. And then the scheme is a 16-week scheme. So how many of those they then do a 16-week review with, and some of the delivery sort of process, what sessions they deliver, etc. So the majority of the grant, it's around a 2.5 million grant across Wales, is spent on staff pay and spent on delivery. So we look at sort of the benefits realisation of sort of local populations coming through. So we monitor this quarterly, so we can see any trends. There are seasonal trends, as you can imagine. Coming up to the summer holidays, it becomes a lot quieter because people are away on holidays or have childcare commitments or grandparent commitments. So we account for that. And we also look at sort of qualitative information from each scheme as well. So we ask them to report on any risks and any opportunities in their area, because each provider, not all of the providers are based in councils, some are based in leisure trusts, and one is the health board. So there's different sort of landscapes in these areas. So we use both the hard numbers and their feedback to look at if there are any issues with performance or any matters that we need to address.
And the only other question I've got, well, at the moment, is if the total grant isn't spent, what do you do with that, or is there clawback from Welsh Government or from?
Yeah, so the grant, how it works, the Welsh Government provides a central core grant to Public Health Wales, and out of that core grant, the National Exercise Referral Scheme is funded. Given the nature of the scheme and that it's pretty much 90% on pay, and we know that there are cost of living rises that have not been passed down to staff, we very much encourage all of the areas to spend all of their grant. We meet monthly with all of the local teams, and we encourage them at each quarterly claim, to reprofile any underspend with a view to spending it all. We don't want to claw back any of the funding because we know they need it in the local areas. So it's only in really extraordinary circumstances that have, sort of come out of the blue, and that they can't reprofile and spend that money within the financial year, would we ever claw that money back.
Thanks very much, Rhian. I'm sure my colleagues have got some questions for you. Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, hello there, Rhian. Thanks for that. Thanks for that information. I got two questions for you. First question is, when somebody gets referred for that 16 weeks, what's the individual cost for that approximately to the scheme? And the second one, I noticed you mentioned it's been going since 2005, so that's 20 years now. So I'm guessing you've seen changes in that 20 years. So what, in your opinion, what's the top two changes that you've seen from when you started to now in that scheme?
That's a good one.
Okay, lovely. I'll take the cost. first. So when the scheme was incepted, it was in partnership with leisure providers, and the grant was never, I guess the vision was never that the grant would cover the full cost of delivery of the scheme, so that there are subsidised leisure rates for people who come through on the scheme. So at this point in time, the maximum amount that we ask the providers to charge for each nurse session is £3. So if you go into your local leisure facility, you will see that's quite heavily discounted on what the prices that are available to you at that point. It was £1 for many years. I started in this role 3 years ago, and at that point it had just gone from £2 to £2.50. So the rise has been quite slow. And we've had really varying school of thoughts really about that. We have some leisure providers that say the rise is not keeping pace with the rate of inflation. And then we've got some who feel that that's too much, and that is actually causing inequalities for those who, purses are tight at the moment. So it's a really quite, contested debate at the moment, this rate. But in our grant terms and conditions, we ask the providers to charge a maximum rate of £3. So that's the first question. Second question, really insightful one over the 20 years. The changes with the scheme is that it's expanded massively. So when it started, I think I mentioned at the beginning, we were looking at patients, clients, populations who were they were at risk of developing. And now we have a huge range of medical conditions that can be referred to NERS. So most of the local NERS teams will deliver phase 4 cardiac rehabilitation sessions. So if someone's had a cardiac event, they will go through rehabilitation within a clinical hospital setting, and then they will be handed over then to our NERS teams. We deliver many falls prevention, pulmonary rehabilitation. So it's expanded massively in terms of the range of the population that we are taking. And I guess this is where the rub is now in terms of demand and capacity, given that the grant has an increase from the Welsh Government. And we're doing a piece of work at the moment to sort of demonstrate the return on investment that providing exercise for such clients, has really, compared to prescribing pharmacological interventions. The other change, I guess, is the effect of COVID on the population, which undeniably changed sort of the type of client that we were getting referred after COVID. And anecdotally, we've lots of the teams have reported that people have been, I guess in layman's term, more poorly. So they're not coming in with one medical condition, they're coming in with 2 or 3. So our teams really are highly trained, and they're dealing with what we call multi-morbidities. So that individual might have 2, 3, 4 upward medical conditions going on, which can be quite complex when you prescribe an exercise, and you may have 25 to 30 of them in one class. But as I say, they're very skilled. We try to group people by ability, because we know the social side of it is really important. So I hope that helps.
Fantastic answer. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a couple of questions as well, Rhian.
Yes,
One, when an application is applied for, is there a time scale for the application to be actually submitted? And secondly, you mentioned obviously working with the council and obviously involving other partners in the council. Have you perhaps considered, perhaps because the people might have to travel to places, have you considered perhaps working with the council community building section, where perhaps we have community buildings which could perhaps put on these courses in these venues?
Okay. Can I just ask on the first question, Councillor White, when you say application, are you talking about the grant application, or are you talking about grant?
Yes.
Okay. Well, just to clarify, because it's NERS has been sort of a long-standing grant for the last, nearly 20 years. There is no application year-on-year process. So each area has their grant renewed. Obviously, it's all subject to performance, etc. But we've never had a case where any areas have failed to deliver on that. So it's a rolling grant programme. And the year before last, we also listened really carefully to our partners in local authorities and leisure trusts, and we made sure that the grant terms and conditions had a 3-year indicative amount, because some of the areas were struggling with having to issue redundancy notices to staff each year, because that was, you know, how their processes ran, etc. So so that's how the grant, it you know, it just rolls year into year. In terms of partners in the council, so my role is a national role, so I coordinate the delivery of the grant nationally to all of the partners and work with a network of local delivery agents to make sure they have everything they need in terms of, you know, improvement, driving, changes, evaluation, etc. So I can certainly speak to our local delivery team in Swansea and make sure, Councillor White, that they do link in with the council community buildings. They are at the moment delivering mostly out of Freedom Leisure facilities, which are quite well located, as far as I can see, in Swansea, and serving most of the community. But if we do allow parts of the grant to be used for room hire, if there are specific areas where they need to deliver in. So we talked about equity earlier. So if for whatever reason public transport to certain leisure centres, etc., is quite poor, which I know it is in some areas, then community buildings can be used. But I will pass that on to the team.
Thanks
Yes,
very
that's
much.
fine. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Councillor James, you want to come in?
Thanks. My question's more for Ben. I just wondered how much Swansea puts into this scheme each year for the Swansea area, roughly.
Extremely good question. Don't know off the top of my head, actually, Councillor James. Could go and find it out. It's certainly one that'd be worth picking up in a written note, but no idea. I don't know if Rhiannon, you had something that you were able to advise on, but as Linda, Councillor James, it's directed at me, I came in, but apologies if I cut across you if you know the answer.
No, sorry, my signal cut out, so I couldn't work out who the question was directed at. Thank you, Ben. So the council will support 50% of the coordinator salary. So that's the agreement with. So we provide part of the grant, and that was, you know, since inception really. So part of the costs as well are very much all the in-kind costs. So hosting all of the staff in offices, all the IT equipment and kit, which I know now runs into the thousands every year for, you know, furnishing teams with that and all the software, you know, providing mandatory development. So all of the, you know, sort of training, statutory training that they require, that's all hosted by the council, expenses, etc. We do provide some expenses, but I know the council will support a lot of that costs. And then the delivery of leisure services is slightly different now in Swansea because it's arm's length with Freedom Leisure. But prior to that, when Swansea Council had leisure in-house, then all of the hire of the room and the gym and all of that kind of stuff, all of that would have been in kind as well. And we are doing a piece of work on that at the moment so that we can provide these figures back to the Welsh Government. So, you know, it'll inform the return on investment on really what the true cost of running NERS is. It's not just the 2.5 million grant that funds the staff. There's all these ancillary costs as well, which in some areas can rack up to, you know, upwards of £70,000 a year.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Morning, Rhian, and thank you for your report. It's just basically a question on your thoughts basically on value for money. The way you're monitoring it is probably via the performance indicators that you mentioned. I was just wondering, within those performance indicators, there must be some that should be met. Well, must be met. I suppose there's some that should be met. But what sort of plans do you have in place should they have not been met? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Jeffries. So I'm very blessed to work with the team of coordinators who deliver this across Wales. They're a very a special bunch of people who are very committed to improving the health of the population of their local area and very diligent. If there are any issues, we do ask them to report it in their monitoring. So not only do the figures tell a story, but we ask for the narrative behind the scenes of what's going on. A lot of the areas are dealing with performance issues with staff at the moment. You know, sometimes people's lives are quite complicated and they aren't always able to deliver on the job because there's a lot going on at home or in other parts of their life, or they're dealing with long-term health conditions, which we do have in a few areas. So we certainly provide any support over and above what the council are providing in terms of core HR services and management support. So I'm in touch on a one-to-one basis with quite a lot of the coordinators to help them through this period. It doesn't appear to be any sort of need to take any punitive measures to kind of withdraw the grant or hold the grant, but that's certainly in the terms and conditions. If there are any concerns, then that is at our disposal, that we, you know, the grant is paid in arrears essentially. So if we had any issue with just, you know, breaching of the terms and conditions, then we would not pay the grant. It does tend to be that we're just trying to support them through quite difficult times. We've had one local team where the coordinators passed away very sadly from cancer, and the rest of the team are trying to sort of backfill and just concentrate on a few priorities whilst they're recruiting, because these are really experienced people. You can't sort of magic them overnight to fill the positions. So the terms and conditions, as I say, of the grant give us that authority to be able to enforce any of the terms if there is just poor delivery. But as I say, I try to create sort of a one Wales team with all of the local delivery people, and they're quite open and honest about what's going on. So I just keep fostering that engagement really to make sure that we're aware of anything.
Thank you, Rhian. I had a couple more questions, but you've answered those in this first question. You've covered every point that I wished to address. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
I have to say your answers are really very comprehensive and very helpful.
You're welcome.
But if I've missed something, if I could just ask the crystal ball time now, how do you see the future of funding moving forward, grant funding moving forward?
Honestly, in this role, it's my biggest frustration that the grant is so limited, because I can really see that the local teams are changing lives. We get a lot of testimonials and case studies from the local population who have gone through, and they weren't in a good place with their health and their mental health and well-being, as well as their physical health and well-being, and participating in NERS and, you know, getting better physical function. The social interaction of it has truly changed lives. So we are in a really difficult post-COVID time with the NHS really struggling. So I do appreciate that there is that, but this is why we've worked really hard to get a research grant to try and demonstrate the return on investment. So the Welsh Government will look at NERS against other interventions and go, which is the most cost effective, which gets the most benefits for the buck. So that's why we think it's really, really important that we get that right, so that we can demonstrate that if they give us further funding, we can help more people. So there's been quite a lot of issues regarding the Welsh Government meeting targets for surgery, so hips and knee surgery. And we know that the benefits of exercise are keeping people well while they're waiting. The Wait and Well agenda is huge. And if they expanded our nurse teams, we had more people, you know, employed, it would benefit the local economy, we'd be giving people jobs, and we'd be helping people get more active. So my utopia would be that the grant would, you know, go up significantly. And we've looked at index rises really on what it should have had, really just based on inflation. And we should at least stay still. We should have had a third more on the grant. You know, I'd like to see it double if possible, but we'll have to see if the Welsh Government agree.
Wishful thinking.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Councillor Tribe.
Thanks, Chair. Morning all. I just wondered if any allowances regarding an ageing population when applying for Welsh Government funding, whether that comes into it. And I would imagine that finances are pretty stretched with an aging population. I would be interested in, if you could answer that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because we are sort of caught at the moment. We started as a preventative scheme, but we're very much now in the here and now of managing people who are really quite poorly. So we're trying to prevent a further decline in secondary prevention, really, of people having to go back into hospital or get them out, etc. So I think this is part of where our sort of return on investment study is going to look at. We're going to look at the different kind of conditions that we get referred in. And we take measurements before and after they complete the scheme. And we're going to look at sort of gains in terms of there's lots of research terms of quality of life, adjusted years, etc. And there are ways of quantifying the benefits to, health and economic benefits really of it. But without a doubt, our demographic is aging, and we need to help people stay well and stay independent, stay out of hospital and stay in their own homes. So, and I believe, exercise is the best medicine for that. So, we will certainly be picking that up in our research and sort of presenting that back to the Welsh Government.
Thanks, Rhian.
Thanks very much, Councillor Tribe. And just on that point, I think the Welsh Government strategy is for frail elderly care to stay in the right place, which is in the community and community settings.
Yeah.
Just throwing that in there. At the end of each funding period or at the review stage, how do you determine whether to continue, adapt or stop the grant or a grant?
So it's a rolling grant. So I guess we've got sufficient evidence because we've had the randomized controlled trial to know that the intervention works. So we've got confidence that we've got, research and rigor behind it. But we haven't sat on our laurels on that. And we have done quite a significant amount of commissioned research over the last few years to look at improvements. And driving improvements in the NHS is obviously a huge agenda. We know money is scarce, so we got to make sure that everything we spend gets the most benefit from it. So we take a look every year at different aspects of the scheme. So this year we're taking a look at adherence. So that is once we get the person in for an initial sort of consultation to enrol them on, how do we keep them on? Because we lose kind of around, I think it's around a third or sort of 20% between them starting and getting to the 16 weeks. So if we can keep them on, we know that they'll get wider, higher health benefits from that, because more attendance means more dose of exercise, which means more, appropriate stress to the body, and they make the adaptations. So we make sure every year that we are looking and reviewing to make sure that when we go into the next financial year, that if anything has to then we have to mandate anything in terms of delivery, we can do that in the terms and conditions. So we make sure that we try and clear off a lot of the research by around the January time, because that's when we review our terms and conditions then for the following financial year. But we very much are doing this in conjunction with all of the local nurse teams. So there are no grand surprises. Everything that we do is very collaborative, and we present back all of the findings and potential implications for any of the findings.
Yeah, thanks very much. It sounds really good, and really, really good that people are being kept informed at every stage of what's going on. So thanks for that, and thanks for being here this morning. I think quite a few of us have learned something new today. So thanks for that. Do any of my colleagues, you got any observations, any more questions, comments? No? Thanks very much. Rhian, you're more than welcome to stay with us if you've got nothing else to do, but no doubt you might have something else to do. But thanks ever so much.
Thank you. No, thank you. Good to meet you all, and thank you very much, and I'll retire. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Ta-ra now. Bye-bye. Now we're on to Joanna Markham from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. So everybody's got to be on best behaviour. You've had a copy of the prepared questions, haven't you?
I have, but I have to apologise because I have just returned after a lengthy time off due to compassionate leave. So I have read them, but probably not up to speed as I would have been if I hadn't have gone off. But so I'll apologise in advance, but I'll try and answer as best I can. I have been in my role for nearly 7 years, so I'd like to think I know what I'm doing, but bear with me.
Well, we can't be too critical, can we? You'll arrest us. But if
no,
no,
I can't do that.
But would you like to give us an overview, or would you like us, because we've obviously seen the questions, would you like us to just go into a question and answer format? It's entirely up to you.
If I just tell you a bit about my role, and then you can ask questions around that, is that okay? Because if I explain it, I'll start from this. Anyway, my name's Joanna Markham, and I'm the Grants Commissioning and Funding Officer for the Commissioner in South Wales. And my role is to look after all the money that comes into the PCC in terms of grants, and all the money then that we distribute between the communities of the South Wales Police Force area. Last year, that was around £15 million worth of grant money. I only look after the administration. I do not do the sort of one specific grant and manage that. That then is delivered by my colleagues. So they would have sort of the reporting and the mechanisms in place to look after those grants, if that makes sense. So it's quite a large team around me that then looks at that monitoring, the value for money, the reporting, and ensuring that we're getting, because it's public money, that we're getting good value for money in those terms. The largest part of the money that we do have, which doesn't come from anywhere else, it comes from the Commissioner herself, is in terms of our community safety support that we give the councils, and the youth offending support that we give to the council, which is part of the police crime justice plan. So that it's not really done in the sense that a normal grant would be done, where you would advertise it, you'd have terms and conditions. It's kind of already given because the Commissioner has decided already to give to those aspects, because she feels that is a priority in her role. But I will say that is currently being reviewed, and we're currently devising a grant framework in readiness for next year. So that's being done. But there are other areas that the councils tap into. We have money from Ministry of Justice. That's quite a large grant, nearly 2 million that one is. And we also have another around about 2 million from the Home Office to deliver violence reduction units across the South Wales area. So that in a nutshell is the largest, the large areas of work that we do, and some of which the councils get.
Is it gone off for? Is Joanna frozen? I think she has.
She has.
Oh, hello.
Hello,
sorry.
You're back. You're back.
Sorry, I don't know where I cut off. It's the security. Didn't like it.
Oh, I understand. I know. Had you finished your presentation there?
I don't know where I don't really know where I got to, but I'm happy to take questions if people have got questions.
Ben Smith, would you want to come in? Thanks very much,
you.
Joanne. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to proffer a bit of advice, obviously via yourself to Joanna, in light of her only just returning. I mean, panel's normal approach is they will accept written follow-up, if you're put on the spot, given you've only just had the opportunity. So I thought it might be wise for me to give you that heads up. And I think you had got to the point. It seemed to be at a natural break point when you cut out. And I was only going to observe that, of course, the linkages with police are even more convoluted with ourselves as a precepting authority via the commissioner to ourselves, and then some of it being additional money. But I think probably that the additional top-up money is useful in terms of local priorities, even though there is a clear circularity. And as Joanna referenced, I mean, the sums that come directly from the Home Office in terms of victim and violence reduction are relatively modest. Your main funding outside of the council tax precept is effectively an element of principal police formula grant from the Home Office, but effectively the Commissioner only really has two main sources of funding directly, and the sums are modest but are helpful in terms of local priorities. So I just thought I'd put that in, but I thought it might just help remind you and guide Joanna if full answers aren't available today for understandable reasons, that it would probably be in order for the committee to take follow-ups if necessary, but obviously only through yourself, Chair. That's all I wanted to come in on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, hello there, Joanna. I got a couple of questions for you. Hopefully they won't be too difficult for you, just coming back to work there. Now, you mentioned community safety, youth offending, police crime and justice plan. Can you sort of give me like some examples of how that money is spent on a project that would help my ward or help my colleague's ward? Where's it like youth offending, so you got money for that. Where would you sort of say that money is best spent in the wards, and examples of how it helps?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Jenkins. To be honest, when it comes to the reporting, I'm not convinced that they go into that much detail. As I said earlier, that's really dealt by another team, not myself.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do have a glance at the reporting, and from what I've seen, it's more of an overarching approach to the criminal justice and to the community safety areas. Sometimes I don't know off the top of my head what Swansea get theirs for, but sometimes it's towards a post rather than a full post, because we're not talking a lot of money. So usually, from my experience in all the local authorities, they usually use it as a contribution towards, say, 3 or 4 posts rather than one particular post. So then to look on a ward-to-ward basis, that would be really quite difficult if they're doing that as a council.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Jenkins. Councillor White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Joanna. Yeah, in regards then to the pot of money that comes available, is this then done by a bidding exercise by each sort of police division or sector? And does this involve then obviously the chief inspectors of those divisions? And also, in regards to areas where they might put a case forward, which I would imagine you have to put a business case forward to receive the funding, perhaps, obviously they would have to base it on sort of hotspot areas of probably antisocial behaviour. And then following on from that, in regards to consultation and community working, does the police then encourage the involvement with our local schools, especially comprehensive schools, where they can perhaps go in and use that role to promote the issues of antisocial behaviour and possibly drugs and things like that?
Okay, I'll try to answer those as best I can, Councillor White. In terms of the community safety money and youth offending team money, that is already allocated on a area base. So the bigger local authorities get the more money. So that's done on a percentage basis. No sort of like bidding application at the moment. That could all change for next year because they are looking at the grants framework in terms of youth offending and community safety, because the Commissioner doesn't feel that it's currently doing everything that it possibly could. It's been this process for as long as I've been there, so it's sort of come from the old commissioner, has carried on with the new commissioner, but she is looking at that currently. I can't say whether it will change or how it will change because that's still being done. In terms of like the hotspot areas, that comes from a different fund, and that's from the Home Office. And my understanding with that is that that's done on a local authority sort of grassroots level rather than sort of senior level within the authority. So it's more links from, I'd say, our PCSOs and those sort of community workers that are on the ground. So for me, that they're more interesting projects because they're much smaller pots of money, and you can really track and see what's being delivered and what they're going to be spending on, because it's really small amounts of money, sort of like under £5,000 really. And then your other question was around local schools. The commissioner does do walkabouts, which might include schools. And I know the PCSOs obviously link in with schools. That we did have a school program, but that was cut quite drastically and very quickly last year. So that's not in existence anymore. So I don't know if that answers all your questions, but please ask any more you have.
Yeah, just come back to the last point.
Yeah.
Don't you feel that this could be a backward step and not involving our schools, especially comprehensive schools, when youngsters are at that age where they tend to want to go out and mix and with friends, and then needs to perhaps fallen on the wrong side of the law? Don't you feel it's important perhaps that some of the funding should be used for a police community support officer within education?
Yeah, so we have got a very small grant. It's under £500 for exactly that. So PCSOs can tap into, oh, we've been to this community or we've been to this school and they would like to do this activity. And as long as it fits in with the priorities of the police crime and justice plan, they can access that money. It's very, very straightforward and very simple for them to do, actually. I've had 2 this last week. So that's their way in of, successfully linking in with those. The other scheme we have got, which isn't a commissioner's grant scheme, but it's something that got tagged onto what I do, is that there is a separate charity called the South Wales Police Youth Trust. And that is a way of those local grassroots people accessing money for the real things that make a real difference in the local community, sort of like the ward basis that Councillor Jenkins was asking about earlier. So that charity is a really good way of ensuring that, crime reduction happens and there's activities for young people to do other than hang around the streets or cause youth annoyance.
Yes, I do feel that obviously the role of antisocial behaviour that come under the remit of the police. And I can remember when we used to have a police community liaison officer within my community, and he was known by everybody within the schools and was respected. So you had that sort of that assurance, and you know what I mean? And I think
Yes.
that could be a good way forward for the police to bring back into use again.
But you will be pleased to hear that they are currently having conversations about maintaining our PCSO levels, because we did have an amount of money to increase them from Welsh Government, but that's being sort of tapered off and cut. But we are having conversations about how that can be bolstered up and that can continue, because we do feel that that's really important.
Thanks very much, Councillor White. Can I just ask, Joanna, how do we measure the success of a particular grant scheme, or
okay?
Sorry.
That's okay. So we've got an outcomes framework, which is across all grants. So anyone that receives a grant will have to report using that framework. It's not something that we are asked to do from our funders. So Ministry of Justice don't ask us to do this, or the Home Office, but as a Commissioner's team, we feel it's really important that we get some outcomes and tangible outputs from our grant recipients, I find from my experience, especially with the Ministry of Justice, they're more interested in statistical figures, which doesn't really help us in seeing what's happened or what the change has been by offering them this money. And the Commission is really keen on finding those stories out and having those case studies to say, oh, well, they've invested this money, so what difference has happened in that project? So that's how we measure it.
Thanks very much, John. I know in Swansea Bay Health Board at one point there was grant funding, I think, from the Police Commissioner, and that was for a domestic abuse specialist nurse, and I know that was really very, very successful, just through the amount of referrals that came through, and the positiveness of that. And it was just disappointing that grant wasn't renewed again. So disappointing all round, but I suppose everybody's dealing with priorities at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, but thanks
and
very much.
everyone's budget gets cut as well.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah. But when you see something that works, you would have thought that maybe the money would be directed into something that works and not maybe a project or some very short term sort of, or also put in a sticky plaster over something when you've got something that has showed its worth. So, but thanks for that. I'm just looking to see if we've got any more questions for you. Any more questions from my colleagues? Yeah, she is actually.
There was a question.
We're just saying how well you're doing, Joanna.
There was a question on the list that I saw around the future of grants and funding.
Yes, the way forwards.
Right,
yes.
The way forward. I don't know. I don't think this is the way forward, but I know it's what our procurement team keep having an argument with me about. About the, should it be a grant or should it be a contract? And they would like quite a lot of our current grants to be contracts because they feel that that's the best way forward. But personally, I feel that would be a real mistake and a real shame for some of those real smaller organisations that have our grant funding, because I think it makes it near impossible for them to bid, and you come up against these big players or people that are able to afford professional bid writers. And I feel that our voluntary sectors haven't got that resource available to them. So we'll continue having that argument. But I do think that there potentially could be more contracts on the cards.
And can I just ask then, just before my colleague Councillor White comes in, what the main difference between the contract and the grant, I'm presuming, would be the length of the contract?
Not necessarily.
Oh, right. Okay.
We got year by year contracts depending on funding. The main difference is the legalities around it. A contract's more legally binding than a grant. Yeah. It's far easier to give out a grant than it is to do a contract. Contracts can take 12, 18 months. We've probably got a record somewhere, I suspect. So, I don't think it's our Chief Finance Officer's preference either, which is really interesting. I find that really interesting. He'd rather do grants. Okay,
that is interesting. Councillor White, do you want to come in?
Yes, very interesting you flag about procurement, because obviously the rules of procurement is obviously to have 3 tenders, and also you've got to be careful then is obviously you get the right sort of agencies, the companies on board to cover that sort of expertise of that service, isn't it? And then would you then be you'd probably be required to have a registered procurement list of potential businesses or contractors to carry out that role. And as you know, we've had a few issues in the past, where we've had big sort of problems. Go back many years with G4S when he took over the running of some services, and it was an absolutely shambles. but obviously they seem to have perhaps turned around now. But those are the sort of areas which would have to be really scrutinised properly to make sure that you are complying with the actual procurement rules as well.
Yes, I think there's lots to think about, and lots of, I think there are benefits. All jokes aside, there are benefits to contracts, obviously, because otherwise we wouldn't go down that route. By not convinced they're the best source for when you're talking about money that's just benefiting, small amounts of money really, benefiting, say, a council, a voluntary organisation, a local charity. It's far easier for everyone concerned to do that through a grant rather than making them go through the pain of a contract.
Thanks very much, Councillor White. And thank you, Joanna. Is there any other comments or questions or observations from colleagues? No. Thanks very much, Joanna. And just sorry about your recent circumstances, and but thanks for answering our questions.
If you have anything else, please email me. I'm happy to respond outside of this meeting.
I was going to say I take Ben's advice on board. Very good advice as usual. And if there is anything supplementary you want to follow up, we'll get in touch with you. Thanks ever so much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ta-da. Bye-bye. And last but not least, I'm going to welcome Amanda Carr from SCVS, and same as our other colleagues that have just left. I'm hoping that you've read the questions, and if you'd much the same way, if you either or, you can go straight into questions and answers, or you can just give us an overview of your role and what you do, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, and thank you for the invite to the meeting. I won't labour too much on SCVS. I'll go straight into the questions. But if anybody doesn't know what SCVS is, we're called Swansea Council for Voluntary Service, and we're an umbrella body that supports other voluntary and community organisations with a whole range of services, including offering funding advice, support with governance, those sorts of things. And we also run a number of volunteer involving projects, and we also run the Swansea Volunteer Centre, so a brokering service between people who want to volunteer and organisations who are looking for volunteers. So that's who we are. Should I just go straight into your first question?
Yes, by all means, Amanda, if you'd like to.
Okay. So this is the question about the role SCVS plays in supporting grant-related work. I've just mentioned that we offer a funding advice service, and we also act as a critical friend to organisations when they're applying for funding, so completing a grant application. So we don't do any bid writing or anything like that for anybody, but we're happy to support an organisation who might be about to apply for a coast grant, for example, read through their application and give them some feedback. But we don't get involved in doing things for people. We're there as a critical friend. We work really, really closely with council colleagues, and SCVS staff often sit on local authority grant panels. And I think that's a really kind of mutually beneficial relationship, because we're bringing our third sector experience, our knowledge of voluntary and community organisations to the table, and being able to therefore support the grant giving process. We sit on quite a lot of grant panels. So, for example, the RPB have a load of grant schemes, and we're also involved in some of that. And then we're involved in quite a number of either local grant giving trusts or national grant giving trusts. So I suppose when we're involved with local authority grant panels, we're also bringing that broader intelligence of who's getting funding from which source, so that we can kind of try and have a sense of coordination. There's not a lot of money around, let's make best use of it. And then the other thing probably to say is that SCBS is also a grant giver. So we have a number of grants that we give out. And in that space, we're also sharing back with the local authority who's receiving our grant funding. So that's probably where we're at in terms of the first question. Would you like me to go on to the next one?
Yeah, if you'd like to carry on, and
Okay.
I'm hoping then colleagues on screen, if they've got any questions that they want to ask at that particular moment, will raise their hands, and if not, maybe we'll have some question and answers at the end.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Okay. So the next question was the one about collaboration. So our experience in SCVS is that local authority colleagues are really receptive to points raised by the sector and work really well together to try and achieve best outcomes. I think the feedback from the sector would be that it would be good to involve the sector in the grant design, so application forms, things like that, and also the end monitoring and evaluation, so design of what that would be. And I think from an SCVS perspective, the involvement in the initial grant design probably would be really efficient, make for efficiencies actually, because we're sometimes involved in panels where somewhere along the line, maybe eligibility isn't clear from the original design of the form, for example. And sometimes that's about not understanding different legal structures that voluntary and community organisations might have. So I think there's room for further collaboration in terms of grant design and then design of the monitoring and evaluation. And part of the monitoring and evaluation for me is because the council can give some really big grants, but it can also give some really tiny grants, like the warm hubs coast type grants, where they are very small, and the monitoring and evaluation that the council undertake, I would say, is disproportionate to the amount of funding that's being given. So I think there's some room for, working more collaboratively with grant recipients to kind of make those efficiencies. And so, for example, do you really need to? It's a lovely thing to do, but if we're all pushed for resources, do we need to be going out to do a quality assurance visit? Is there not a way of doing that more efficiently? So I think the picture's really good overall, but the design and also the monitoring and evaluation are areas where we could collaborate more effectively, I think. So on to number 3.
Can I just ask on number 2? So you're saying the monitoring is disproportionate?
I think some, yeah.
In what way is it disproportionate? So is it more onerous? Are we having to put more? Are you having to put more resources into that?
No, I think actually for some of the very small grants that the council gives out, the council are putting a lot of resource into the monitoring and evaluation.
All right.
So going out to visit every grant recipient, for example, and yet the money might be £500. There's a lot of staff time involved in. Yeah,
that makes sense. Thanks very much.
Okay. So on question 3, Sorry, I'm just reminding myself of the question. Oh, so this is the barriers and challenges. I think, sorry, is it barriers and challenges? Make sure I'm answering the right question. Right.
Yes, that's the right one.
Yeah.
You're on the right
Thank
one.
you. Thanks. I think there's a challenge for the council in that not everybody, has the same level of expertise in understanding legal structures, for example. If that isn't your day job, then actually being involved in doing due diligence before awarding funding can be a real challenge. I think that's some space where, by SCVS staff having been involved in some grant panels, we've been able to really collaborate because we kind of understand what we're looking at. Whereas what being a charity or a community interest company means is, isn't something that, if it isn't your day job, it can be a bit mystifying in terms of what then you should have in place to be acting within the law. So I think there's more that could be done in the due diligence space, and our experience on panels is that it can be patchy across different grants, and also that the due diligence that the council undertakes actually looks quite different to other grant givers. So Big Lottery, for example, or even our own grants in SCVS. So it can look quite different, but actually, if you're doing due diligence thoroughly, again, it can be really resource intensive. But I suppose examples are, we would always, if we're distributing grants, we'd be looking at things like a reserves level that an organisation has, or whether the organisation is solvent. So there's something about maybe what we all agree is appropriate due diligence to be doing to protect the public purse, basically. Welsh Government in that space have also recently reissued or revisited their code of practice for funding the voluntary and community sector. So there is also that document to kind of guide us all as grant givers in terms of best practice. And there are other things like, for example, and I totally understand from the local authority's perspective why this happened, but the recent grant, the coast grants, I think it's something like a 12-day turnaround to apply. And I know why that is, and I know there isn't really an option with that one. But when you, reflecting a little bit what previous speakers have said, there's something about equity here for me, because if you're a large organisation, you can deal with a 12-day turnaround deadline. If you're a little tiny organisation and you're voluntary led, 12 days can be really, really challenging to get a grant application in. So there's something about, even if it were things like giving pre-notice that a grant will be coming out, so that people can be kind of gathering their thoughts ahead of time, ahead of a necessary short deadline, that would be really, really helpful. And then some organisations talk about the online form to apply. And I haven't filled it in myself, but I believe that you're entering your data, but you don't know what the next questions are. So you're kind of having to do it online without having seen the questions in advance. So if there could be an offline guidance document to tell you what the things are that you're going to have to answer, that would also help organisations, because you can then reflect on what your answers are going to be, and then you're delivering a much better application.
Can I ask something? Excuse my ignorance, but what is the reason for the 12-day turnaround?
Well, I suspect that it's needing to get those grants out ahead of half term, because some of it will be food support. and then the kind of getting places open as winter warm hubs and stuff as the seasons change. So kind of wanting to do the best thing for communities by getting the money out there as quickly as possible so that the activities can start to happen. But actually, if groups have been told in, I don't know, July,
yes,
that there will be a grant round coming in September, then, and that broadly what the money would fund, then actually people would have had more weeks to think about what they were going to apply for.
And preparedness. That's
Yeah.
the key, isn't it? Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you. Councillor White, do you want to come in? You're on mute,
Yes.
Mike.
Yeah, yes, please, Chair. Yeah, in regards when applying with the grants as well, the application, I know some organisations within my ward now, sometimes they apply and they feel they got to be a Philadelphia lawyer to fill the form in. But surely is there terms of reference provided with the application?
I mean, you usually, with any grant scheme, you have a guidance document that is explaining what the grant funder is hoping that you're going to kind of explore in your answer to different questions. But I mean, simple application forms, simple guidance documents. You know, we all need it to be in that space, because most of the really good stuff that we're doing as kind of community organisations, you know, we're not lawyers, we're not experts, so we do want it to be simple. And then the other thing that I was gonna mention, which I've already covered really, is the thing about evaluation. So quite often groups will get an evaluation form at the point where they get a notification of a grant award. So sorry, I've got that the wrong way around. They need to know at the point where they get the grant notification what the expectations in terms of evaluation will be, rather than finding that out, you know, kind of 4 months into the project and they haven't set up whatever system it was that they were going to need to be able to answer the questions that they were then going to be monitored on. So on question 4, my thought is that on the whole, local authority grant schemes are really well aligned with community needs. You know, people in Swansea do know what the communities that we're trying to support need, but appreciating that the scenario, appreciating that you if you're receiving, I don't know, a Welsh Government grant to deliver something, you'll be bound by, you know, what that can be spent on. So you're kind of having to use the money for its intended purpose. So sometimes there can be a misalignment at that level in terms of perceptions of what a local community needs, if it's actually money that's coming at a kind of regional or other level. So there is a real misalignment there. And there's also, I mean, money's tight, times are difficult for everyone. The thing that voluntary organisations really need at the moment is unrestricted funding, and the thing that we always get offered is project funding. So you have to kind of dream up a new project that kind of helps you to try and carry on doing what you're really good at doing. And I appreciate that, you know, if you're the council and you're being told that this fund is to open warm hubs, you know, you don't have that flexibility to give people what they really need, which is the unrestricted funding just to carry on what they're doing. But there is movement in this space. So lots of the grant giving trusts have acknowledged over the past few months that the past year or so, that actually the key to sustainability is the unrestricted funding, not the project funding. And they have been moving over to offering unrestricted funding to organisations. And really, that's the way that you get sustainable delivery. So I think I'm done on that one. If I move on. On question 5, within the thing that I talked about the constraints of funding sources and the short-termism that all of us see, the thing about that ability to be flexible, to be able to use unrestricted funding, does create sustainable services. And then on question 6, and just reminding myself what question 6 is. This is the planning, planning effectively. So I think that the key things for me are the due diligence and eligibility criteria. Six is about, I've done question 6 is the extra about vouchers, wasn't it?
The voucher scheme, yes.
So we don't offer any vouchers. We refer people to where they might get vouchers, but we don't distribute any. But I think it's a really tricky area, if I'm honest, because the due diligence around it and the eligibility criteria and being really kind of transparent and equitable about that is really important. There are obviously things like Citizens Advice who are distributing the prepayment meter vouchers, so that there are vouchers out there. But the other thing that we come up against sometimes is how vouchers might be perceived by, I don't know, DWP or the Home Office. So those kind of borderline things where you people may be at risk of being perceived to have had income. Lots of the sanctuary seeker support organisations are now kind of really advising against vouchers, because if that came to the attention of the Home Office in someone's claim, it could be seen as additional income, for example. And there are also examples in the same space in terms of benefit claimants. So we don't distribute any, but for those who do, the key thing is being really careful about the eligibility, I think.
That's very interesting. Thanks for that. Is there anybody else that comes in? Any colleagues, questions, observations? Ben.
It's an observation, Chair, and I'd like to thank Amanda. I think she's trodden an appropriate line around some of the difficulties that we face, being frank, around large governments through to a council, which is still a large organisation, being quite large, being top down versus the underlying preference for bottom up demand, and squaring those is difficult because it's often difficult for a large organisation to turn things into small amounts of practical reality in pure cash, as opposed to the clumsiness of vouchers and other sorts of things. There are reasons for it because we're not very good at handing out small sums, and bigger government than us even more so. Just to reassure you, for Amanda's benefit, what you've said is a microcosm of what the council itself says as a recipient of grants. We always want unrestricted funds in the form of revenue support grant and NNTR because it's the best way in which we can control our destiny, rather than the hand-to-mouth existence of some of the schemes. And yes, I share that same view in terms of, even on a bigger scale, scrabbling around to justify projects to fit specific grant streams. So would echo in entirely those. The one that was perhaps most interesting for me was one that I think my colleagues will need to look at in terms of that due diligence stuff. As you've rightly acknowledged, it is taxpayers' money, so there is a degree of it. You've also got in there that Often we do unto others what is done unto us, where if it's subject to terms and conditions which can tie our hands. But it is an interesting one to make sure that where we do have flexibility, it's one that I should probably share with colleagues to see if they can be more amenable and flexible, certainly if it's disproportionate in scale to value. So I think that's an interesting one the panel will want to reflect on with colleagues, where they've got the opportunity to influence those, as opposed to where we are equally constrained. And that very much, we get an annual settlement, so it looks like it's going to be the same again. Money is tight. We've discussed previously in the panel why we accept and understand ministerial priorities for specific projects, and we're grateful to get that on top, but it tends to be the on top stuff. And as Amanda's very eloquently said, it then makes it very difficult if it's not unrestricted funds for that sustainability part, and that echoes what the whole of the local government family says. So I understood and heard all of that. It felt like a microcosm version of, with the greatest of respect, but very much the same, and I'm sure it will chime with panels. So it was mostly observations on that, but the degree of checking and due diligence is one that would probably be useful for the panel to feedback. It's a shame some of our social services colleagues aren't here today, because that's probably where you get a large amount of your interaction with some colleagues there. And also just worth exploring if there are other areas where there's, because you've flagged there might be some inconsistencies in approach with some of the other departments, which give out perhaps some of the smaller grants. Maybe it certainly would be a point of learning for the panel to feed back. But I think that was eloquently walked through the perils and pitfalls of both sometimes being giver and receiver and some of the constraints, but I think you acknowledged it appropriately and gave the panel some food for thought on a couple of those. So that's what I wanted to say, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Smith. And can I thank Amanda again? And can I just say that we've had 3 excellent presentations this morning. So thanks very much. And it's given us a lot to go back and think about. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything or any comments on what you've heard this morning? The next meeting, I think, is our last one.
Yeah, the next meeting will be all your evidence that you've gathered,
Yes.
so you can look at that to decide upon your conclusions and recommendations, and have that discussion.
Excellent. Councillor White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, there's certainly a lot that we could learn, especially from the last presentation, Chair, in regards to obviously to support groups, especially applying for the small grant process, and perhaps simplifying the way that the forms are perhaps set out in a more sort of easy to read way of applying, because I know for a fact that some organisations, they get perhaps a document plus 10 or 12 pages, and they get put off straight away before they, go ahead and apply for it. But I think in the cases where, whether I'm looking for advice on Ben here, whether there could be a sort of cap level saying on a certain type of application form that we could send out, Ben.
It will very much depend, Councillor White, on whether it's freely our money that we're giving out from core services, albeit again that obligation and duty on local taxpayers. It's going to be harder, where, as Amanda's quite rightly said, where she recognises what we do unto others, what's done unto us, and some of those may still be very, very difficult. But I think it's something that should be in there in the mix. As your Section 151 answer on the wider hat, I am always taking views as to the degree of risk I'm prepared to take. And it was an interesting one, wasn't it, during COVID in particular, where to some extent the local authority rule book and every other rule book was ripped up entirely. When needs musted and something had to give, we were incredibly flexible, as were a whole raft of other bodies, of sometimes just getting on and doing it because needs must, as opposed to process. So it's one I'm prepared to consider in conjunction with the colleagues who predominantly administer them, where there is some flexibility, getting that balance right. But recognising that if it's council's own money going in, it's ultimately council taxpayers' money going in. But often, if it's the bigger stuff, it will be subject to a whole raft of terms and conditions. The Welsh Government, for example's standard terms and conditions are quite useful in terms, I refer to them as boilerplate, in that they're incredibly useful because they now tend to be very standardised, but they tend to run to pages and pages and pages, and it probably doesn't vary whether it's a grant to us for £7 grand or £7 million, and it's that same that I'd echo Amanda, that then potentially flows through to us. So one, I think, to think about with colleagues in the areas that particularly administer them. I suspect on none of them we're a bit tied up in terms of process, but it goes back to the point I made. Sometimes we're not very good in local government, wider government, of recognising how to get big sums out down to the smaller bits at a meaningful level that is helpful to people without entirely putting them off. I do accept that point. I'm sure the panel will reflect on that in terms of its advice, and we can follow up with relevant officers as to what flexibilities there are. Councillor White.
Excellent. Thanks again, Ben. I'll bring the panel to a close then, and we'll see you all on the
23rd of October.
23rd of October. Thanks everybody for attending, and see you again. Thanks. Ta-ra.
Thank you. Bye.
Ta-ra. Thank you.